sometimes to torture them for information, and for the most egregious offenders, they'll be executed. Israel is a creation of the Anglo-American Empire. Its purpose was to maintain the sanctity, the value, and the credibility of royal coinage against counterfeiters. And so to deal with counterfeiters, he set up a network of spies to identify these counterfeiters, sometimes to torture them for information, and for the most egregious offenders, they'll be executed. Okay? So in other words, Newton established England's very first intelligence agency, intelligence apparatus. In 1865, the United States Treasury Department established a Secret Service. What's their job? The job was to identify counterfeiters. Why were they called the Secret Service? Because the Treasury Department didn't want people to know they existed. Because if they existed, it meant that counterfeiting was a huge problem in America, which it was at that time, which it still is today. And so that would undermine the credibility of the currency. Okay, so Newton had his own intelligence agency. So in many ways, Newton built the foundations of the British Empire, which eventually became the Anglo-American Empire, which controls the world today. Let's summarize, and I'll give you 3 takeaways from today's talk I want you to remember, okay? The first takeaway is, because Isaac Newton saw himself as a prophet, because he was convinced that only through divine favor could he arise from being a poor, abandoned child to becoming one of the leading intellectuals of British society, the leading scientist of British society. It could only be through divine favor. Then he had a mission to spread God's message. And that message will become the foundations of Christian Zionism. So Christian Zionism is embedded into the very fabric, the very foundation of the Anglo-American Empire. Okay, that's the first major takeaway. Second major takeaway is Israel is a creation of the Anglo-American Empire. Zionism is a creation of Christian Zionism, which leads us to the third takeaway. Judaism and Zionism are not the same thing. Christian Zionism and Judaism are in fundamental conflict. Let me explain why. The people who are most opposed to the creation of the state of Israel are Orthodox Jews, because in their tradition, in their religion, the plan is for God to send a Messiah, the anointed one, who will lead the Jewish people. And this Messiah will bring the Jews back to the Promised Land, create the nation of Israel, build the third temple, and create the Messianic age. Okay? The Jews don't know who this Messiah is, and they don't know when he will come, and so they must be patient and have faith in God. Christian Zionism is an attempt to manipulate history, manipulate God, to force the second coming of Jesus. In the mind of Christian Zionists, if the nation of Israel is reconstituted, if all the Jews return to Israel, if the third temple is built, if there's a war of Gog and Magog, then Jesus is forced to return. They will force the hand of God and create the Messianic age. So for Orthodox Jews, this is a blasphemy. This is counterfeiting. This is stealing their religion. And that's why Orthodox Jews are most opposed to the state of Israel. I know this was an extremely controversial, very confusing talk. So please look at Newton's book, Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John. Please look at the Schofield Bible, which frames the Bible in the lens of Christian Zionism. And please look at wiki entries for Christian Zionism, premillennial dispensationalism, Newton. Okay, so if you really want to understand what's going on in the Middle East, then you really need to get a good handle on these ideas. I'm sure this talk has raised a lot of questions for you. Some of you are like, why is Christian Zionism so powerful? Some of you may disagree and say, what's driving this war in the Middle East is not Christian Zionism, it's international finance, it's the City of London, it's the Great Reset, it's American Empire, okay? So what I will do in my next talk is explain to you, these things are not mutually exclusive. They're all one thing. And you can make the argument that they are one big conspiracy. And the only people who don't know that this is a great conspiracy are the conspirators themselves, okay? In my next talk, I will use game theory to explain to you what's going on. And when I do, then things will be extremely clear to you as to why Christian Zionism is able to drive the history of the Middle East, okay? What I'll also show you next in my next talk is that Christian Zionism, what's happening in the Middle East, it's happened before and it will happen again, okay? So 1,500 years ago in the Middle East, it seemed as though biblical prophecy was about to be fulfilled. The world was at war against each other. Empires were fighting over Jerusalem, and millions were dying. The world seemed to be ending. It really seemed the end of history. And at this time, the Jews were praying for the Messiah. And they really believed the Messiah had come to them. Okay? A man came, and they really believed he was the anointed one. And he was able to rally not just the Jews, but everyone around him. He was so charismatic. And it really seemed as though the Messianic age would come. And these Jews were willing to die for him. That's how much they believed in him. Well, actually, we don't know this man's name. But today, we refer to this man as Muhammad. Okay? Muhammad was the Messiah of the Jews. So in my next video, I will explain to you how this came about. Just a quick announcement. But if this war in the Middle East breaks out again for whatever reason, I don't think it will, but if it breaks out for whatever reason, then rest assured I will make a video helping you analyze what's going on and giving you some insight as to why this is happening and where things might be going.